All righty. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. On the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent, looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We now explore, well, my geography says it's the West, but arguably it is Central African countries. So we explore the country of Cameroon, and who better to teach us about this country or any African country than our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and activist Abayomi Azikiwe of African Newswire, and also frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Cameroon's history and current affairs. So, Abayomi, first off, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so much for your continued interest in developments on the African continent.
Well, as always, it's always an honor to have you, and always my thanks and appreciation for you taking the time. And oh yes, and of course, before we start, please, folks, do donate generously to Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report, and please donate generously if you can to One Plus One. Share all of our content, past and present. Help us overcome the far right algorithms and help us overcome the monopoly that Western corporate media and state media has in the social media world by sharing all of One Plus One's content and again donating to us. And now on to the topic at hand. So, Abayomi, as always, tell us what was Cameroon like before. Actually, this should no longer come as a surprise to our viewers, but Cameroon was actually a German colony before it became a sort of peculiar, partly French colony, partly British colony. So tell us what was it like before, broadly speaking, European colonization, and then yeah, do tell us what it was like for Cameroon when it was under this weird sort of partly French colonization, British colonization, and sort of formally French colonization. So yeah, go right ahead.
Yes, and archaeologists and historians have been able to trace human settlements in the area now known as Cameroon back some 30,000 years. And it was occupied by numerous population groups, including some areas of being populated by the Batwa, the Twa people, the so-called Pygmies have settlements there. One of the best known ancient civilizations of the area is the Sao Kingdom or the Sao civilization, which can be traced back to the 6th century BCE, before the Christian era, and it extended through successive leaders up until the 5th century AD, after the beginning of the Christian era. And this civilization, of course, is enormous. It encompassed Cameroon as well as sections of Chad. And even going forward into the 19th and 20th century, many of the ethnic groups in the area trace their origins back to the Sao civilization. There were other civilizations even prior to that, one known as the Gaji Ghana culture that was around Lake Chad. So yes, it has been a tremendous historical trajectory on the part of the people of that area. Also during the 19th century, there was the Bamum kingdom or Bamum civilization, which was headed by a man by the name of Ibrahim Njaya. And he not only was a figure, a ruling figure, political figure, but also was instrumental in developing a written language for the traditional people who had come out of those civilizations, starting with the Sao civilization among its successors. So yes, there was a high degree of civilization which existed in that area. And you mentioned whether or not Cameroon is part of Central Africa or West Africa. So it's,
Exactly.
I like to phrase it, I like to categorize it as Central West Africa because it borders Nigeria, for example,
Exactly.
Chad, which is considered Central Africa, Nigeria, of course, considered West Africa,
Exactly.
Gabon, which is considered Central Africa, but is also on the western coast of the area. So yes, it is West Central Africa. And of course, the population today has been estimated anywhere between 28 million and 31 million people. So this gives you a brief overview of what the situation was like there prior to the intervention of European colonialism and imperialism. The Portuguese contact with the 15th century. The area was not totally.
Actually, Abayomi, can you repeat that again? So the first contact with Europeans was actually the Portuguese.
Yes, that is what has been reported.
Okay, go right ahead.
During the 15th century, but the country was not totally taken over by European colonial powers until the 1800s, when in fact the Germans had sent in a colonial economic and corporate expedition during the mid 19th century. And then after 1884, where you had the Berlin Conference in 1884 and 1885 that was convened by von Bismarck, the German leader during that particular time period. It was officially made a German colony. Now, you had Cameroon, you also had Togo as well in West Africa, which had been conquered by the Germans. When the Germans took over in the 1880s, there was a tremendous amount of resistance to German colonialism. You had wars that were waged. In fact, a major rebellion which took place during the early 1890s by the Bakweri people who had fought valiantly against the Germans, losing many of their people, but also staving off German involvement, intervention in the interior of the country between 1891 and 1895. Now, you had some groups tactically who collaborated with the Germans, but some did it for a few years, and then when they realized that what was actually going on, they turned against them. So the German colonial system in Cameroon was ruthless. It was based on the same type of practices that were used by Germany and other parts of Africa: forced labor, dislocation of the people, and ruthless suppression of any form of resistance inside the country. So this took place right after the Germans intervened. And in fact, the Bakweri resistance, I mentioned that earlier, went on for 4 years. And they had a king who is still a legend in Cameroonian history. His name was Kuva Lakinye. And he led a rebellion against German colonialism for 4 years. And he was able to stave off the advance of the Germans. Eventually, they were overcome because Germans sent for heavier reinforcements, stronger weapons, and they had to flee into the mountainous areas. But the king, Kuva Lakinye, eventually died, but it was not clear exactly where he died and where his remains are located. So there's still a lot of mythology and legend surrounding this battle that took place during the early 1890s. Now, after the defeat of the kingdom of Bakweri by the Germans, the resistance continued through various forms: strikes, passive resistance, people who ran away from the area and fled into other areas. So yes, there was definitely resistance to German colonialism in Cameroon during the 1890s. And even after they subdued the armed resistance, people continued to have demonstrations. They continued to petition and demand an improvement in their conditions.
And then, of course, Germany loses this major colony after its defeats in World War I, that notorious inter-imperial war, and then Cameroon becomes it becomes well yeah well it's served as partly colonized by the French and then partly colonized by the English. So talk to us about that, and then how it became more or less of and then how it became more or less a French colony, and of course and of course what were the conditions of the majority Cameroon people under that under this second stage of capitalism, I mean of colonialism, and then the final colonial chapter of France before its independence.
Yes, it's important you mentioned that with the defeat of Germany during World War One, they were forced to relinquish their colonies in Africa. We talked about this before in regard to Tanganyika, was a former German colony, which fell under the control of Britain. Also, Rwanda and Burundi,
Yep.
which had been German colonies, fell under the control of Belgium. And Namibia in Southwest Africa was also colonized by Germany, and they committed genocide against the people there, as well as in Tanganyika, and also in Cameroon. So in Cameroon, the territory after the defeat of Germany during World War One became a League of Nations Trust territory. And that was done in 1919 after the Paris peace talks that were headed heavily by Woodrow Wilson. And then in later years, after World War II, that was reimposed as well in 1946. We talked about before the fact that Germany was taken over. Germany took over France in 1940, and then the French resistance,
Yes.
which was multifaceted. But the titular head was Charles de Gaulle, and they knew they had to form a new republic. So this is what they did, forming the Fourth Republic in around the period of the end of World War II. And they had the conference, one of the conferences of the Free French Republic in 1944 in Brazzaville, the Republic of Congo.
Yes.
So yes, they attempted to institute reforms after World War II, but during World War One, of course, they lost control. Germany lost control of Cameroon. The French took it over as a colonial power, but they called it a trusteeship. And of course, that continued the resistance as well during the era of the 1920s, the 1930s, and of course, the 1940s. The resistance continued largely through the petitioning and mass demonstrations and strikes. There was the formation of the CGT, the Confederation of Trade Unions, which had a branch in Cameroon. They also were part, during the 1940s, a part of the African Democratic Rally, the RDA, which was a multi-state, multi-country political party that formed leading up to and after World War II. So Cameroonian nationalists were involved in all these developments that were taking place during the period of the defeat of German colonialism, the rise of British colonialism, and then the period between World War One and World War II.
Interesting, stupid question, but I'll ask it anyways. Safe to say that France continued a lot of the ugly practices that the Germans had already instituted on the people of Cameroon, and was Cameroon influenced by the worst of all worlds? So it had the awful French colonialism, and then elements of the Anglo colonialism, but more of the French. But the French had the upper hand, I guess, in influencing much of the language that the majority of Cameroonians still speak to this day, which is French, correct?
Yes, and the country was partitioned between Britain and France. The majority of the territory was taken by the French, but the Northwest and the Southwest was considered Southern Cameroon. So yeah, there was that division based upon colonial legacy, and that remains a major impediment to national unity today, and we'll talk about that later.
Exactly.
The Germans had set up plantations and workstations, and after their defeat, in World War I. A lot of that was taken over by the British and the French. The British attempted to sell those plantations on the open market, and they were not all that successful. Eventually, they wound up turning over a lot of that property back to the former German colonizers as businessmen, so they could manage the colonial spoils that were,
Wow.
of course, the main objective behind colonialism and imperialism in Africa and throughout the world. So, yes, this went on between World War One and World War Two.
Fascinating. And that leads to this question. So, how did Cameroon become independent? Was it a peaceful transition or a violent one? And I'll also throw in this question, which is my third official question, which is talk to us about Cameroon's early years as an independent country and the legacy of Amadou Dijo. Forgive me, folks, if I'm butchering his name, who ruled from 1960 to 1986, and what was his planned liberalism? I'm very curious your answers to that.
Well, let me just mention prior to the independence movement, there were trade union activities. I mentioned the CGT, which had an affiliate in Cameroon.
Yep.
Also, I wanted to mention the fact that they were subjected to horrendous working conditions during that particular time period. A lot of the Cameroonians refused to work in the British and French economic corporations and firms. So what they did, the British in particular, they brought Africans from outside the colony. A lot of them from Nigeria were recruited to come and work in Cameroon. And that
Ah,
too was designed
interesting.
to cause divisions between the local people and Africans from other parts of West Africa who were brought in because the indigenous people from that area refused to participate in being slaves into the colonial system. So what happened was that the RDA was formed, and a man by the name of Reuben Naobe, who was a renowned nationalist leader, began to agitate not only for workers' rights, but also for national independence. And himself and others formed in 1948 an organization called the Union of Cameroonian Peoples, the UPC, which was a
Okay.
militant left-wing political party that sought full independence for the Cameroon, the unification of Cameroon, and it was also a Pan-Africanist organization. And initially, they were involved in organizing demonstrations and strikes and petitioning the French government to relinquish control of Cameroon. But due to the repression that they met from France, they were forced to embark upon an armed struggle in Cameroon. Now, this
Wow.
episode in Cameroonian history is the most covered up, the most suppressed. A lot of people know about the armed struggles that were waged in Algeria, but very few people know about what took place in Cameroon during the 1950s and the 1960s. It was vicious. This repression by the French was horrendous. Tens
Wow.
of thousands of people were slaughtered, and the UPC was able to mobilize many, many people to fight for the national independence of the country. Now, I mentioned Reuben Naobe, and he was hunted and eventually forced into exile. And in 1958, he was executed by the French secret forces, secret intelligence forces in 1958.
Wow.
So this just gives you an indication of how vicious these people were. And the thing about the UPC is that it was internationalist. It supported the armed struggle that was being waged by the National Liberation Front in Algeria. In 1958, at the All African Peoples Conference in Accra, Ghana, Naobe was there representing the UPC. He also was very supportive of the MNC, Lumumba in Congo, and had
Okay.
visited there during the summer of 1960 when Patrice Lumumba still remained in power. So Ruben Umnaobe was assassinated in 1958. He was succeeded by another leader named Felix Roland Mumi for the UPC. And he continued the armed struggle. He continued to campaign for national liberation of Cameroon. And he was eventually killed in November of 1960. Now, what happened was that the French, as we mentioned in previous episodes, came up with the idea of the Fifth Republic. This was advanced in 1958 by Charles de Gaulle. He went to the various African colonies and asked them to vote to become a part of this new French configuration.
Exactly, which basically it still is the French Empire, but you guys, yeah. but in theory, it's you guys will have much more of a say and much more autonomy in your day-to-day affairs, but you will be part of France, basically.
Correct? Yes, and like in 1944, when they established the Fourth Republic, and they instituted reforms allowing some representation locally, as well as greater representation of Africans in Paris in the National Assembly. Now, the 1958 referendum on the part of de Gaulle was supported by the electorates in various African countries, but in Guinea, it was rejected by the Democratic Party of Guinea that was headed by President Ahmed Sékou Touré, and they broke out on their own in October of 1958. And in retaliation, France withdrew all of its technical support. They left absolutely nothing in the country, ripped phones out of the phone lines, took everything they could to leave Guinea totally broke. This was in 1958, the same year that Ruben Umnaobe was assassinated by the French intelligence forces. And Ghana, which had only been independent for a year and a half under the Convention People's Party of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, loaned Guinea 10 million pounds, which was about, at that time, about $25 million, which was a lot of money in Africa during that particular time period to sustain the country in light of the total French withdrawal of resources from Guinea. And that's how they formed a partnership in 1958. They formed the Ghana-Guinea Union. And it had a lot to do with the fact that Nkrumah had came to the rescue of Guinea after they had withdrawn from the French neo-colonial proposal. So Cameroon did get independence in 1960 under the man you mentioned earlier.
Yes.
Amadou Ahidjo, under the so-called Cameroonian National Union Party. That was in 1960. Later in 1961, they merged the former British colonial territories with the French colonial territories and formed a united Cameroon. So that's how that happened. Now, the UPC, the Revolutionary Party, whose succession leader, Felix Roland Mumi, was assassinated in 1960, they continued to wage an armed struggle against the Cameroonian government of Ahidjo. They said that the country was still a French colony as far as they were concerned, and they wanted to overthrow the government of this French-backed neo-colony. So this continued through the 1960s, and the French assisted the Ahidjo government in crushing the UPC rebellion all throughout the 1960s. And in 1970, the successor to Felix Roland Mumi, a man by the name of Ernest Wadayi, was captured in Cameroon in 1970. He fled during the 1960s. He was in and out of the country. He had been in Conakry, Guinea. He went to the country of Congo. He went to Congo while Lumumba was still in office, but then he had to flee, of course, after the coup and the kidnapping of Lumumba and so forth. And he also went to Ghana as well, but he re-entered Cameroon to continue the armed struggle. And he was captured in 1970. And then in 1971, he was brutally executed by the Cameroonian government and their French military backers. So they wiped him out.
Wow.
Ernest, yeah, Wandai. So the UPC was crushed pretty much militarily. They were isolated politically, and it was reconstituted some years later, but they've never been able to recuperate from the French suppression, which began in the 1950s, continued through the 1960s, and the assassination of Ernest Wandai in 1971. So the Cameroon National Union was a very right-wing party, was closely aligned with France. It pretty much followed the same anti-communist line as other neo-colonial administrations throughout Africa. And of course, with oil, they were able to shore up the economy of the country during the 1960s and 1970s. But in the 1980s, with the decline in oil prices, they started having difficulties and, of course, unrest throughout the country.
Fascinating. And in fact, before we talk about the Cameroon in the 1980s, what's your left wing assessment of Amadou Adijo's planned liberalism?
Well, it definitely didn't benefit the majority of the people in Cameroon. And his close alliance with France, of course, means that he went along with other French neo-colonial projects throughout the African continent and throughout the world. He stayed in office up until the 1980s. So at some point, it was a one-party rule, pretty much a right-wing neo-colonial dictatorship. And then, of course, people began to demonstrate demanding multi-party democracy. And that, of course, was realized during the early 2000s. But Paul Biya was his successor. And he's pretty much...
Actually, I'll get right
okay.
into that.
Okay, go ahead.
So planned liberalism did not help out the majority Cameroon people. So since 1986, as you already mentioned, Cameroon has been governed under the leadership or presidency of Paul Biya, who first served as the 5th prime minister under Amadou Adijo, and the Cameroon National Union. He actually dissolved that in 1985 and then founded the very right wing, as you mentioned, Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, which, according to Wikipedia, is a big tent party. Not really. It's mostly a very right wing party, very narrow nationalistic, very pro-French, and wanting Cameroon's language, culture, business, and more closely tied to France. And from 1982 to the present, Biya has implemented neoliberal policies, one of austerity, so massive privatization and massive cuts to education policies, government-funded healthcare, and workers' rights. So talk to us about Biya's rule over Cameroon during the final chapter of the Cold War, as well as the 90s, the early 2000s, to the very present.
Yes, the country was racked with horrendous corruption and inefficiency. And this really came to the fore during the 1980s and 1990s, where people were not able to afford basic commodities, foodstuffs, and it caused a lot of internal tension inside of Cameroon itself. So no, the Paul Biya regime, although it has lasted for decades, has not been successful in building development, efficiency, and also ending corruption inside of Cameroon. So this is the problem, and these difficulties continue to fester up until the period of the 2000s, when in fact the country was split between the English-speaking and the French-speaking territories. Initially, it was a political movement involving strikes and petitions demanding better and equal rights. And then, of course, later, as a result of the government suppression, an armed struggle erupted. just over the last decade in the Northwest and Southwest among the English-speaking community, and that they want to form a Republic of Abyssinia, which they claim would represent the English-speaking territories of Northwest and Southwest Cameroon. I understand the repression that has existed there, the almost nullification of the work that was done during the post-World War II period, the 1960s. Nonetheless, can this be resolved is a question through a further partition of the country? I don't think it will, and that's probably why there's been very little recognition of the Republic of Abyssinia, which is supposed to be the English-speaking area of the Cameroon. Prior to that, they formed the Southern Cameroon National Council, which came out of the multi-party democratic transformation that developed during the 1990s. But then, of course, the Republic of Abyssinia is their objective, and they have met tremendous repression from the Cameroonian government as well.
Unbelievable. And my last two questions actually is about that. So we will return to that. But let me ask you though this question, which is, what was Cameroon's place in the Cold War and its relations with the U.S., France, and their English and Francophonie allies in the collective West, and its relations with the USSR, China, and the Eastern Bloc nations?
Well, they clearly were allied with France. They were not on the side of the Soviet Union or the People's Republic of China in terms of support for national liberation movements. They were part of the Organization of African Unity, which had a OAU Liberation Committee. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any direct support that they lended to the national liberation movements, for example, in Southern Africa. And even earlier in places like Guinea-Bissau, for example, which was waging an armed struggle against Portuguese colonialism, they tended to be on the right, to play a conservative role, and to be closely allied with French colonialism and neocolonialism, to the point that France, of course, has troops there and participates in the security apparatus of Cameroon, which they are still doing up until this point.
Very sad. However, on the plus side, this is very interesting when I was doing my research into Cameroon, which is, what are Cameroon's relations like with BRICS and right now and its fellow African countries? From what I read, it enjoys very good relations with China. It more or less it diplomatically supported China's efforts to crack down on pro-Western and Western-funded groups in Hong Kong and Hong Kong secessionist movements. It was one of the many Muslim majority countries, or partly, or countries which has a large Muslim population,
Right.
which stuck its neck out for China and pushed back against the many accusations that China discriminates against its Uyghur Islamic people or engages in cultural or physical genocide towards its Uyghur people. And I understand Cameroon has had many disputes and conflict with Nigeria. You mentioned that when Britain had a little bit of a foothold in Cameroon because of Cameroonian resistance to all of its colonial masters, Britain would bring Africans from its other colonies like Nigeria into Cameroon. So talk to us. Yeah. So I'm curious your response to that, and I understand that Cameroon has had many disputes and conflict with its neighboring, with its neighboring country of Nigeria. So
yeah, the Bakassi Peninsula was one area of conflict, and that had a lot to do with the oil resources that were thought to be there. And that went even before the International Court of Justice, the highest judicial body of the United Nations. And the ruling was in favor of the United Republic of Cameroon. So they did win that dispute with Nigeria. So that was positive from that standpoint. And also, China, the People's Republic of China, typically does not deal with the internal affairs of countries such as Cameroon.
Exactly.
That could be a reason why they have in turn provided no refuge for the propaganda against China as it relates to the Uyghur population, which has been proven is totally false in regard to what China is doing there in their efforts to modernize that region and to eliminate poverty. There are reports that Uyghurs were sent to fight in counter-revolutionary wars that took place that were led by these so-called Islamic insurgency groups. So yes, China has a right to deal with its own internal security, particularly if the U.S. and other countries are trying to politicize the situation among the Muslim population. In Cameroon, the majority of the population are Christians, Catholics, and Protestants, but there are a significant segment of the population are Islamic. And this may have something to do with the fact that Boko Haram had established a foothold in Cameroon and had engaged in fighting against the Cameroonian government and the civilian population. Now, over the last several years, President Paul Biya has declared victory over Boko Haram, but that remains to be seen. There was collaboration between the Nigerian armed forces, the Chadian armed forces, and the Cameroonian armed forces to try to fight Boko Haram. But Boko Haram was a group that became internationally known in 2009 when there was a big crackdown against them in northern Nigeria. And since that time period, they have been involved in armed actions against the Nigerian state, the military, as well as the civilian population. They have split into at least two factions. You have the Islamic State of West Africa along with Boko Haram. So these groups are very suspicious in terms of their origins, as well as who's arming them, who's providing them with cover. And of course, if you look at the Islamic State, we know it grew out of the U.S. occupation of Iraq.
Exactly. In fact, I was just I was just thinking our good friends over at Press News. I believe they were I believe they were one of the first to expose that actually something I've long always suspected about Boko Haram, that actually U.S. intelligence and U.S. intelligence and British intelligence actually were involved in actually fomenting Boko Haram, grooming Boko Haram into the reactionary mess that that is not just for Nigeria but other countries in the continent of Africa. So yeah.
Yes. So that's still a lot of instability that is taking place in northern and central Nigeria. It's not all Boko Haram. You have criminal groups that have been operating there, and also the so-called Islamic State of West Africa. But in Cameroon itself, with the development of this civil war between the Republic of Abyssinia and the United Republic of Cameroon, has also caused displacement and deaths inside the country. And people have fled Cameroon, and there's a Cameroonian community here in the United States. And interestingly enough, President Donald Trump, who this week announced travel bans on anywhere between 12 and 19 countries, has also revoked the protective status of the Cameroonian nationals that live in the United States, along with others, other people. So they're facing the potential of deportation back to Cameroon for no reason. I don't know what his rationale is for this, but with Trump, who knows? It changes almost from day to day and from week to week. So he's re-invoked the travel bans, which he had done in 2017 right after he came in. Remember, he had evoked travel bans in all these different countries following what George W. Bush Jr. had done back during the early 2000s. He has done it again in 2017 and now again in 2025. So he wants to make it appear and he wants to ensure that America remains a, quote, white man's country, unquote. I mean, if you look at the complexion of his government, for example, it's all mainly white men. If you look at his policies, they're all directed against African people, Asian people, Latin American people. He wants to make America a white man's country again and for in perpetuity.
Exactly,
And
exactly.
that is the bottom line. That is why they're fighting so hard to deport as many people as they can from the United States, because the people of color population in the U.S. has grown exponentially over the last few decades, and with more and more young people looking leftward in the United States, they feel this is an existential threat. Therefore, they come up with these draconian immigration laws, banning of migrants from being inside the United States, and moreover, the reversal of bourgeois democratic norms, the right to vote,
Yes.
the right
Yeah.
to have access to public accommodations, the right to education, a whole notion of
DEI,
academic
affirmative
freedom.
action. Yeah.
All of this is under threat right now by the Trump administration. He's threatening universities, even elite schools like Harvard, for example, have had research grants suspended. Foreign students, their visas are being suspended. So they're in a paranoid frenzy to maintain this facade of whiteness in the United States. But I do not believe it'll work because the contradictions are so great that Trump is even turning against other European imperialist countries.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just amazing. He's turned against Canada, which is the largest trading partner and the best ally, best friend of the United States. He's turned against them as well, and this will continue because there is no logical or reasonable way out of the crisis that U.S. and world imperialism faces at this time. Look at the spat that's going on between Elon Musk and Donald Trump right now
I know.
over
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
over the contours of this budget, you know, which is a wartime budget. It's a budget that is designed to drive more people into poverty and desperation. And at the same time, they've raised the defense budget to $1.1 trillion, the largest U.S. defense budget in history. $1.1 trillion. They also have money in the budget to hire tens of thousands of more security agents for the immigration services. And you know these people are going to be vetted ideologically to
exactly,
be,
exactly.
you know, anti-black, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Latin American, to go out and round up people and deport them from the United States or either hold them in indefinite detention. So the Cameroonians, who have historically been friends, the government has been friends of the United States and France, have had their protective status revoked by the Trump administration.
Crazy. In fact, my second to last question actually is about actually is somewhat related to that. So, but before I get there, let me ask this question, which is how do you assess the opposition in Cameroon? The largest or most popularly known opposition is the Social Democratic Front. Do you think it's a left wing alternative to the unjust status quo? And reading about the Social Democratic Front, which was founded in 1990, it believes in social democracy. It is a member of both Socialist International and Progressive Alliance. How left wing both of those organizations are, yes, one can
We can
argue
debate.
about it. Very Western chauvinist, though. And their leader was John Fru Nadi. Forgive me if I'm butchering his name, who passed away in 2023. How do you assess his legacy and the current leadership of Joshua uh, Osesh? And forgive me if I'm also butchering his last name as well.
Yeah, they are advancing a program that's far more progressive than what we have now in regard to the Paul Biya government and the political party that has been in power there now for a number of years. The problem is the repression and the corruption inside the country. It makes it difficult for any party to effectively organize and to build up a base to participate in national elections. So this is the problem that they're facing. Whether or not they can do this politically remains to be seen. But I think that it's an indication of the discontent that exists among many people in Cameroon. For example, there's been labor unrest in the country periodically for over 15 years in the transport sectors and other sectors of the economy. And this has to continue if there's going to be some reversal of the current political stagnation that exists inside the country. I mean, Bia is way up in age right now, and it's not even clear if he's actually running the country, whether other people in his party administration are actually running it in
Interesting.
effect. So we'll see what happens over the next few years, but they're going to have to resolve the fighting that's taking place around the formation of the English speaking republic. And they're going to have to deal with the economic crisis inside the country, as well as curtailing the corruption and inefficiency that is the hallmark and has been the hallmark of the Cameroonian government for decades.
Second to last question on Cameroon is reading about the Social Democratic Front. I read though that they are social democratic and but they strongly appeal to the Anglophone, which is the English speaking community in Cameroon, and that's their base. Talk to us a bit more. You've already actually alluded to it many times. So talk to us a bit more about the Anglophone crisis and the ongoing Anglophone problem. And I could be wrong, but reading about it on Wikipedia, I'm surprised Britain, the US, and Canada, especially the latter, with its official bilingualism and its ongoing opposition to Quebec independence and what many people feel is Canada's obligatory to often give autonomy and special rights to Quebec. I'm surprised, that Britain and Canada and the U.S. hasn't exploited this more to have influence not only on Cameroon as a way to influence African affairs, but also to kind of muscle France out of having influence in Cameroon and Africa. I'm curious your response to that, and also it's also important to note that Cameroon is officially part of the Francophonie community, but is also a member of the Commonwealth. So I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, Ahijo had said, way back decades ago that Cameroon was not a francophone country, that it was a bilingual country, that they recognized both English and French as national languages. The problem with the English speaking regions of the Northwest and Southwest is that initially many of the people living in those areas wanted to join the Federal Republic of Nigeria and not join with Cameroon as a broader united republic.
Wow. Okay.
And
Interesting.
also the question of language as well. There was criticism going back a decade or more about the courts not having English translations within the court system. So this created divisions between the English speaking and French speaking communities in Cameroon. So that question has to be resolved. If it's truly a bilingual country, then everything should be bilingual, whether it's education, the court system, and so forth.
And yes, there is often ongoing there is often an ongoing armed struggle, which is met by by a very repressive state apparatus, this is where I find I'm not for I'm usually against British, Canadian, and U.S. imperialism, but this is where I feel they could where those three countries could play somewhat of a good influential role, which is trying to solve this crisis. But I guess It must be one of those things where, well, where France has a foothold in this country, we have enough of a foothold in different, different African countries, including ones which are majority French speaking, like
Right.
Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo. Is this why it seems? Is this why you feel the UK, Canada, and even the US has had a sort of laissez-faire, see no evil, hear no evil when it comes to Cameroon?
Yeah, it could be. Um, France, of course, wants to maintain its influence there since they've been booted out of several countries or being threatened to be removed. We know about the Alliance of Sahel States asking for the French to leave, along with the U.S. military forces. Chad has also asked for French military forces to leave. Also, Cote d'Ivoire, surprisingly enough, even though they're coming up on an election in several months, have also asked for French troops to leave. Senegal as well has suggested that. So they could be concerned that if they start pressuring the Cameroonian government too much, they could damage their relations with Cameroon. That could be one of the major issues. And as you said, the British may not want to pressure Cameroon because it has interest there, and also because they don't want to aggravate their relations with France or the French pro-French Cameroonian government. But we'll see what happens in the next few months and next few years in this area. Uh, they're going to have to resolve this regional conflict. Otherwise, it's just going to be a breeding ground for further fighting and dislocation, destabilization, and underdevelopment in Cameroon and neighboring Nigeria as well.
And final question: any final thoughts on Cameroon and the best way forward to achieve not just peace between the Cameroonians, but how it can be a prosperous country to all of its people? What does it need to do to achieve this? Even if Cameroonians were to oust Paul Biya and his party and end his neoliberal terror peacefully or violently, what do you think needs to be achieved for Cameroonians to share the prosperity that they do have, even if they were to oust Paul Biya? I'm very curious your response on that.
The first thing they have to do is end the civil war between the English speaking areas and the French speaking areas. They have to end corruption inside the country. And they have to bring about a genuine multi party political system. The program of the UPC, the Cameroonian People's Union, was a left wing, socialist, Pan Africanist program. In my opinion, that is the best policy moving forward. They want the UPC wants unity throughout the country, as well as unity throughout the West Africa, Central Africa, and Africa as a whole. So that is the way the country. This is what they have to do in order to move forward. Whether they can do that in the short term remains to be seen.
Fantastic. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One, our All Things Africa edition, learning about the history and current affairs of Cameroon with our always wonderful returning champion, the historian, journalist, Pan-Africanist, leftist, and all-round anti-imperialist in support of all people power movements, Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Check out his work and all of his appearances on One Plus One, and do subscribe to Pan-African Newswire and BAR, Black Agenda Reports. Donate generously to them, and don't forget to do the same for One Plus One, and donate to us, please, and share widely all of One Plus One's content, and encourage others to like us, and again, share and donate. The next country that we'll be exploring next week is Equatorial Guinea. Join us for that. Have a great weekend, everyone. Good night and good luck, and all of my best. And again, solidarity to the Palestinians, and happy Pride. Until then.